Awesome. Good to see you. That was wonderful. Hey, if you have your Bibles, would you turn me to Esther chapter 5? We're going to continue our adventure together on this glorious Mother's Day, looking through the book of Esther, asking the question, what does it look like to be a Christian in a culture that doesn't necessarily agree with, promote the same convictions and values that we do? What is our approach to this? And we've been saying all along that while there may be some merit to going on the offense, and taking back culture in that kind of regard, and there also may be merit in one sense of retreating from culture and protecting our values and protecting one another. While there may be merits on both sides, what the Bible prescribes for us is more of a being fully present inside the culture, regardless of how sinister, regardless of how wayward, regardless of how different, and really to a real degree, regardless of how the culture treats us or our thoughts or opinions, God is inviting us to be fully present. So we're looking at the book of Esther, trying to deduce what does that even mean and what does that look like. And I think chapter 5 in particular is going to address some very specific ways that we as God's people are called to be fully present in a culture that doesn't share the same convictions or values. So let me do this. I'm going to pray and we're going to jump straight into it, okay? Father, we thank you that you are good and that you are trustworthy and that you care infinitely more about the culture that we live in than we do. Father, you love culture. You are a culture maker, and you've invited us to be a part of the transformation of this world and its culture until you return. Father, what a privilege and an honor. But Lord, at the same time, it's hard. It's hard when we look out into the world and we just really don't recognize the world that we live in. It's just so drastically different. There's so many gray areas. There's so many conundrums. So Lord, would you do what you do best? Would you encourage us where we need to be encouraged? Would you challenge us where we need to be challenged? That we might be a local expression of your church that is choosing to be fully present, to be fully known, not retreating, not fighting back, but trying to the best of our ability, learning how to cultivate an enjoyment in Christ in the places and around the people in the places. We love you, we trust you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We left last week looking at chapter 4 on a massive cliffhanger. Esther had resolved to be a servant of the Lord, and she was going to go into the king's abode, if you will, and there she was going to request that something be done about the decree from Haman that said that it was going to wipe out all of the Jewish people because of one Jew, Mordecai's insubordination to this newly promoted number 2 guy named Haman. And it's a cliffhanger because Esther resolves to do so, but we don't know what happens. But chapter 5 opens up immediately with what goes down. So look with me at verse 1. In the book of Esther, chapter 5, verse 1, we read this from the author. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance of the palace. Now we know from the last chapter this is a really big deal because you're not allowed to go before the king unless you are invited. Going before the king uninvited was a sure death sentence, but this is the road that Esther chose to walk. Esther had a choice. I could save my life, or I could attempt to save the life of my people. And so she decides the latter is the best option. And so now we're at this hugely climactic moment where we're going to learn what is the fate of Esther. How will the king respond to Esther breaking the law right before him? And then we read in verse 2, and when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. And that's a phrase the author keeps using over and over and over again in this book, reminding us that while there's this massive, powerful king before us in the story, while his actions and his weight is very powerful, at the same time, there's something else going on behind the scenes. There's a grand architect. There's a grand king that is weaving together his own story in the midst of this particular society. So the author reminds us by saying that she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to half of my kingdom," which to me is hilarious, right? Because still, you see the guy. I feel like he's really trying. I feel like Esther's put herself out there, and he's really trying because it's rather obvious. I can't know this for sure, but it seems rather obvious that he does love her. He is very affectionate for her. He has chosen her out of thousands and thousands of women. She is very dear to him. The fact that he's not killing her or having her killed on the spot says a lot, speaks volumes about how he cares about her. But what's so funny is that as much as he cares about her, she can only have half the kingdom. Right? This is the best offer I can give you. To me, that's all. Verse 4, Esther says, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." You can just imagine this scene unfolding. Like Esther's walking in, what I would assume assuming the posture of a child who's approaching their parents for something that they probably know they're not going to get. Her mind and heart racing as she's bowed in this lower posture, eyes darting back and forth, not really knowing where to focus them because her mind is going so fast with all of the thoughts she's consuming. And while she's playing out all of these possible scenarios of what can happen to her, the unthinkable occurs. The king grants her access to himself. And then not only that, he senses that she needs and or wants something and immediately says, "You can have anything that you want." Like this story in this moment couldn't have gone any better. Yes, the author resolves the tension lickety-split, but nevertheless, like this is what we were praying for. This is what Esther asked Mordecai and the people to be praying for. Give me favor with the king. Give me a plan. Give me the next thing that I can do that's clear, and let me know that I'm making the right move. And bam, we have it, which is why it is so catastrophically surprising how Esther responds. Like she has him where she wants him. Literally, for lack of better phrases, eating out of his hand already. And he says, "Tell me what you want and I'll do it." And she doesn't mention the decree. She doesn't mention anything. She says, "Hey, I'm going to throw a feast and I want you to invite me." And the question is, why? You have him where you want him. Why in the world are you doing that? And there's several different possibilities. Maybe she chickened out. Maybe she's looking at the king, looking at her potential fate, and she realizes, at any second, if he changes his mind, I'm dead. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe she got scared. Maybe this is all part of a grander plan where she's really just learning to manipulate him. One of the things I wish that the author would have talked a little bit more about, because I think it is fairly obvious that the king really cares about Esther. How does Esther feel about the king? Like, is this purely just a formal relationship? Is she into him? We're not told those things. So it could be that Esther's just scheming through this plan, in some way manipulating him, playing this long game so that she can end up getting what she wants. But if it's purely manipulation, I think one of the problems with it being purely manipulation is that she invites his number two in command. She invites him along. Now, we already know a lot of things about King Xerxes, right? We know that he is very fond, let me put this rather gently, he's very fond of the female presence. So if she's purely manipulating him, is this the best way about going to do it? Is throwing a party and inviting other people? I don't think so. I don't think that's a manipulation. So if she didn't chicken out, and she's not manipulating, what is she doing? I think what the author is trying to show us that she's showcasing before the king, this is what a servant of the Lord is. Yes, she wants something from it, but what does she want? She wants the lives of the people instead. So what does she do? She models before the king a representation of a Jewish person who honors their God with theological convictions and shows love and hospitality and service. Because that's the way their God has treated them, so in return, that's what they do. But She's modeling before him from her own theological convictions. This is the type of person I want to be, even in situations in which I feel stuck, and I feel like something needs to be done. I'm still going to respect you as a person. I'm going to respect the system and not operate inside. Which, if you remember, is completely polar opposite of how Mordecai handles the situation. Which is like the polar opposite example of how many of the biblical characters handle any kind of hostility or any kind of situation in which they're being forced to compromise. Now, it's not that one is better than the other, but it is giving us a better perspective of what it looks like for someone who follows God to be fully present inside a system that doesn't agree with their values and traditions. You have these two polar opposite things. But what's most interesting to me is this. As a result of the way that Esther interacts with the king, he quickly is delighted to comply with her request. Look at verse 5. The king said, "Bring the meeting quickly, so that we may do as Esther had asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, he said to Esther, "What is your wish? What shall be granted you? And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom." He says it again. The opposite means it. It shall be fulfilled. Then Esther answered, "My wish and request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases him to grant my wish and to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them tomorrow, and I will do as the king has said." Like, Esther is deploying an extreme amount of wisdom in forms. Like, she understands there is a lot riding on this conversation and this request that she's going to make. Like, the circumstances that surround this proposal have to be thought about and have to be implemented with the most tiniest of detail into consideration. Because remember, the agreement has already gone out, the money has been spent, the people are in order, the date has been set. The Jewish people are going to face extermination. So if Esther's going to do something about it, she's going to need the king to give her more than just half of the kingdom. So she goes about in a very slow, methodical way, employing all kinds of wisdom, and at the same time working inside the bounds of the system that's already there. It's an incredible scene that we embark on as we try to open this up. But by the time the scene ends, both the king and Haman are enthralled with Esther's care. Esther's concern for them, the hospitality that she shows, which again is so ironic because of the way in which Esther identifies, the way in which Esther interacts with them is completely contingent on her Jewish convictions. This is the way God wants me to treat other people, whether they agree with me or they don't agree. Whether they want to support and help me or whether they want to harm me. This is the way to take care of someone who's been made. It's unprecedented. Which is so interesting. Well, maybe it's not interesting. And the people who respond so well. Haman and the people who respond so well. Yes, they're good. Now, what becomes ironic is that it's the same convictions, and it's from the same theological idea of God, and the same knowledge and experience of God, that causes Mordecai to respond the way that he does to Haman, and Haman hates him. Look at verse 9. Because we're going to see Haman be incredibly sour against another Jew who shares the same convictions as Esther. Look at verse 9. Haman goes out that day joyful and glad of heart after doing this. But when Haman saw Mordecai going into the sun, he sees Mordecai in the gate, and that he never rose or trembled before him. He was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself from the home and sent and brought spies and his body. Mordecai and Esther are both operating in their Jewish convictions. The same God who commands us to love and serve others also commands that he be the only object of their worship. Which means that we are faithful to God. Sometimes, well, be faithful to God always involves two things: refraining from certain things, and at the same time, involving ourselves with certain things. Like there's always this push-pull. But Haman is very okay with the way in which Esther is serving and hospitable to him and caring for him just plainly as a human being. He's very okay with that. What he's not okay with, even though it comes from the same theological root, he's not okay with Mordecai standing for his convictions and not bowing down to them. To the extent in which he's ready to kill. Now, in our cultural moment, I think this is so incredibly important when we think about our own cultural moment and where I think God's dream for the church and its local expressions is. Let me say like this. In our culture, it's normal for people on any kind of spiritual journey to start picking and choosing on the plethora of religious and spiritual experiences. And put together kind of their own, make your own experience. That's very common. And I think from a Christian perspective, let me give you this one real quick. I'm going to say some very punchy things. So I need you to hang with me. Hang with me, because I'm going to intentionally say some punchy things. Is that fair? Can you see that? Well, have Mother's Day. Picking and choosing from the smorgasbord of religious ideas and spiritual notions is just typically, a lot of times, how the modern person will piece together what they believe about God, about truth, about reality. And I think from a Christian perspective, I think there's some credence to this. And the reason is because, as Christians, we believe that the Scriptures teach, and Jesus straight up says, that He is the way, the truth, and the life. So anything, yes, that maybe does not bother me at all, it's okay. Anything that is true, anything, regardless of the source, regardless of the context, if it is true, that is God's truth revealing something about His nature and character and work. It's very true. Now, hold on. So the big question is this. Can we really look to other religions, other philosophical systems, other ways of life, other cultures, and as Christians affirm truthfulness in them? And I want to say big, fat, whopping yes. We can. Now, hold on, let's unpack that, because I know somebody got really uneasy for a second. I thought you'd be punchy a bit. If you're getting nervous, let me resolve your nervousness for a second. Let's define truth. When I say truth, what do I mean? And I stole this from a professor I had in college. He defined truth like this, and made me define it like this on essays. When I say truth, this is what I mean. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. It identifies things as they actually are. It can never fail, diminish, or change, and is rooted in the God of the Bible. So are there tenets of other religions that we can celebrate as being true? And I want to say yes. If other religions didn't have truthfulness to them, why in the world would people follow them? Number one. Number two, if God is the author, revealer, the source of all truth, then all religion, any religion that somehow contains truth, it only does because it's some kind of borrowing or appropriation of what God has revealed to be true. So am I saying that there are non-Christian religions that contain truth? Let me be very, very clear. Yes. Yes. Only in the areas from which they borrow from or overlap with what the Scriptures reveal to be true about God Himself. Now, I think it is vital that we chew on this and process this in our particular cultural moment. Because I think what it means to be fully present in a culture that doesn't reflect our values and convictions, thinking through truthfulness and different appropriations of it is a very powerful way in which we can have a real dialogue with the culture in which we live in. One of the reasons why our culture hesitates when it comes to Christianity is really this reason. Because we have become so good at identifying with what we're against that the culture at large has no idea really what we're for. We're so identified always by what we're against that people really don't know what Christians are all about or what they're for. Case in point, one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about our faith is because we're always afraid that people are going to reject us or it's going to change our relationship. And I get that. I totally understand that. And I still struggle with that hardcore. So I'm with you. But we need to understand something. If I go up to someone at the gym, the grocery store, on the street, a neighbor, whatever, and I begin to share with them, and I'm courageous, and I begin to share with them, I'm a Christian, and the whole time I'm talking or answering questions or whatever, I'm thinking about love. I'm thinking about forgiveness. I'm thinking about what a wonderful thing Christ has done in my life and all the wonderful people in my life that God has put to encourage me. That is not what that non-Christian is thinking. You know what they're thinking? They're thinking, this person's a Christian, which means they don't like this about me. They don't like this about me. They're definitely going to judge me here. And so before they even know you or get a chance to understand what you're for, they're already front-loaded and have been taught to know and to recognize what you're against. Do you see that? So, I mean, that alone should drive us to reconsider something that I think is incredibly vital in this particular moment in time. Because I think one way that we can change this, or at least help change this, is for the local expression of the church, for me and you, to become more known for what we're for, not just what we're against. And one of the ways that we do that is by learning how to celebrate what we can celebrate. In the Christian worldview, there are three things that are happening simultaneously. We're really good at two of them. We're good at challenging things that are not Christian, and we're good at rejecting things that are not Christian. But there's also another element where we have to become good, and I mean like reflexive good. Like we have to become incredibly good at celebrating what we can celebrate. We have to, if we're going to move the ball forward. So let's do this. In my lifetime, I'll give you an example. In my lifetime, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the church talk about, or maybe just kind of broad evangelicalism, talk about boycotting Disney. Now listen, I'm not telling you what to do, right? You know, if you're not familiar with where Disney's at in the news right now, you know, it would behoove you to be aware. So I'm not telling you what to do. My challenge for us is this. How do we think biblically about companies and corporations like Disney? Do we just write them off when they say something that we don't agree with? Do we just constantly challenge them when they're making policies and standing up for things that we have an intense relationship with? We can, and there are areas in which we probably ought to do that. But listen, at the end of the day, like Disney is not a Christian company. I hate to break it to you, but Disney is not a Christian company. They're influenced by modern and postmodern aspects of philosophy that infiltrate every aspect of their parks, their movies, their apparel. And yes, there are aspects of Disney, the Disney Corporation, and other non-Christian corporations that we need to be weary of, that we need to challenge, that we may need to reject. But Christian understanding, but we are already so good at those things. Another question we have to bring to the table is, what about Disney can we celebrate? Is there anything about Disney that we as Christians can get behind and say, that's awesome? I don't even know, let's just say for several decades. I don't know how old Disney is. I'm sorry, I'm lost. Do you guys know how old Disney is? 90, 30? How about 70? Let's say 70 years. Thank you, Wayne. You can. Like, but for decades, like, do you understand? I mean, decades. Disney has been producing at high quality and incredibly high demand some of the most influential and beautiful stories that connect to the core of what it means to be a human being. And here's the thing about Disney. They do it at such a level of excellence where you can have one movie and you can have Grandma, you can have Uncle Joe, you can have small baby Timmy, all in front of the same TV having a magical experience, no pun intended. Like, they do an amazing job at telling stories. In almost every movie, almost every Disney movie, themes like forgiveness, transforming love, sacrifice, courage, like those rise off of the screen and pierce our hearts in innovative ways in which not a whole lot of other companies are doing. And the themes are so powerful. Why? Why are those themes so powerful? Because you and I are human beings who long for those themes to be a part of our real life. We long to know and experience a love that so transforms us. We long to be forgiven. We long to be the hero of the story. Like, we long for these things. Disney does an incredible job with creating worlds in which these themes just leap off the screen, leap off the page, and pierce us in a very profound way. And to the careful observer, what you'll notice is that all of these themes that are so powerful have been borrowed from a story that is true. Let me show you what I mean, for instance. Let me show you. The movie Frozen, one of my favorites, and probably yours too. In the movie Frozen, you have the story of two siblings and how their love for one another, particularly one, transforms an entire kingdom of darkness and ice into a flourishing kingdom of light. But it's only through the sisters' sacrifice that the darkness is broken. And this theme, when it happens on the screen, is incredibly powerful and captivating. Do you know why? Because it's a true story. It's borrowing from a real historic story of a real sibling who makes a real sacrifice for himself, or for his siblings, breaking the curse of this world, ushering in a kingdom of light where humanity can flourish forever and ever and ever. So does that make Frozen a Christian movie? No, not at all. But what makes it powerful are the elements that it borrows from the Christian story. That, my friends, we can celebrate. Now, my most recent favorite Disney movie, Encanto, does the same thing. Encanto is a fantastic movie with all of the singing and dancing, but what makes it fantastic, even spectacular, is its innovative use of Christian truths. Right? The family in Encanto are given this magical home and their powers, and in a real sense, they're the fullest version of themselves they can be. And they're given these things so that they can help the city around them flourish. But the magic begins to fade as the family becomes preoccupied with their own struggles and their own endeavors. Even to the point of banishing one family member because he's just so insistent on telling the truth. But we don't talk about burnout, so I won't. And then it becomes the task of the lowest member of the family, of the most, for lack of better terms, awkward member of the family, who has no powers, who embarks on this journey to save their home and to save their family, and she succeeds by loving them and by serving them, even to the point in which she willingly allows herself to be banished, if that's what it's going to take, so their home can be restored, so their family can be made right again. My friends, when Jesus came into the world, he chose a lowly path. He chose to relinquish his power and his authority. He left his own home to come here to love and to serve, to the point of which he gave his own life, the ultimate banishment, to provide for us a home that would never be taken away and be established forever. What makes Encanto powerful is that it's a true story. It's a story of Christ and what he's done for his family. That's what makes it so powerful. Now listen to me. There are aspects in both of these movies that as Christians we need to be wise about. We need to, especially when our children are engaging in these things, or our students or younger people around us, we need to be able to ask hard questions. But listen, don't miss the point. The most powerful scenes in every movie, in particular Disney movies, are usually borrowing and or just straight up plagiarizing from the true historical story of the person and work of Jesus Christ. Bar none. And my friends, this is something we can celebrate incredibly loud. Incredibly loud. with a little theological clarity and a little bit of good question asking and a little bit of understanding the narrative of the Bible, do you know how easy it is to use a Disney movie that people already connect with and show, if you really like that, let me tell you the real story. Let me tell you the story that this is based on. You know how easy of a transition it is for that? We have to learn, my friends, how to celebrate what we can celebrate. We also have to challenge what needs to be challenged, and we do need to reject what needs to be rejected. But man, our muscle deficiency is really bad and big when it comes to being able to celebrate other things. Because it doesn't have the word Christian on it, or it doesn't have the word church on it. But all truth is God's truth. And all great stories are pointing back to the greatest story ever told, the true story. We need to celebrate what we can celebrate. God's people are to love God, to serve other people, and in a culture screaming for love and tolerance, like the one that we find ourselves in, guys, it's us that are positioned well to meet that need. We're commanded and empowered to love and to celebrate aspects of those who may not share our beliefs, values, convictions, and we need to be loud about it, even towards those who want to do us harm. Now this next scene in verse 11, Haman is going to dial up the evil to level 10 or greater. Look at verse 11. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches. I love that phrasing so much. He's got all his friends together, his wife is there, and he's reciting before them the splendor of his riches. What are his riches? The number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king has honored him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and the servants of the king. And Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her together with the king. Look at verse 13. Verse 13 is such an incredibly important verse in understanding the person and character of Haman, but also giving a really deep insight into the human condition. Verse 13 we read, yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. And this idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Haman has riches upon riches, but there's a particular treasure that Haman has not got yet, that he doesn't have possession of. So as he's with his friends, he's recounting all these riches that he has and all these things with great gusto, and everyone's saying, yeah. You're so great, you're so great, you're so great. Mild, similar application. Hey, maybe don't surround yourself with people that are just going to tell you how great you are all the time. Just mild application there. That may not be a great idea. Just saying how great I have all these riches, I have everything. But then there's something that he doesn't have. He has the sons, he has the promotions, even Esther has invited him to these feasts. Like he is enjoying a tremendous amount of riches and material and prestigious blessings. Yet his mind is fixated on one treasure that he doesn't have. And what the author does a fantastic job of doing is revealing what that treasure is. We could say it's power, we could say it's influence, we could say probably it's significance. But it's actually different than that. Because he already has those things. What's the treasure that he's lacking? It's that other people are not acknowledging how significant he is. That's the treasure. The treasure that he's missing is there's a Jew who's running around town not giving me the honor and significance that I think I am due. And what's the solution? I've got to kill him. Because if he's not going to give me significance, if he's not going to promote my significance that's due for me, then he deserves to die. Now listen, I don't know about you, but for me, this figure, this picture that we're getting of Haman, I can really relate to. I can really relate to go into really dark places when people's perception of me is not what I think it should be. I find myself in my mind oftentimes debating with those people, or arguing with those people, or I'm going to show them scenarios, or even just, if I'm honest, just wishing for their abrupt failure. And I don't think I'm the only one that's like that. I think oftentimes a lot of us have a problem when we are not perceived by others the way in which we feel like we need to be perceived. And I don't think this is just a treasure hunt from the ancient Persians. I think that it's a modern one that all of us experience in Texas all the time. Let me ask you a question real quick. Have you ever seen Katy from above, like in an airplane? Or really even just like a suburb in general? Well, there's Katy from an airplane. And if we had the time, I would ask you, hey, tell me some things that you notice. Like, what are some things from the aerial view? Like, what are some things that you notice about our city and our town? And there's lots of things there. Well, I think some of the things you'll notice is that houses from above, suburbs, again, generally, Katy even specifically, like houses, you can't help but notice how uniform they all are, right? Like, they're all in uniform with one another. There's not many that stand out really as different. And now imagine if you're in a plane looking at this and you were to land and you start walking around like in the streets. You'll still notice a lot of like uniformity. You notice that the grass in people's lawns is typically the same size. It's usually edged the same way. Like there's just a lot of similarities. Even with like yard decorations and stuff, they may be specific to that particular family. You know, like we know with LSU, you got your LSU stuff out there, you got your A&M stuff, you know. But if you take another step back and just look at it, what you'll notice is that usually the arrangement of the stuff is symmetrical. So while it's specific to the person that's living in the house, at the same time, it's still just recapitulating this symmetrical approach. Now, I hope what you're thinking is, like, who cares? Why in the world are you talking about this? But I'm talking about it for a really good reason, because, again, in suburbia in general, Katy specifically, listen to me, beauty, aesthetics, morality, and significance are all tied to conformity. And this way of looking at life is not just imparted to us through like interpersonal relationships or by listening to the education system. Like it's way beyond that. It's the space itself imparts to us a certain way in which we believe that life works. Conformity is the air in which we breathe in a very real way. And the reason why we participate in it and give ourselves over to it, whether we're thinking about it or not, is because not only when we conform, when our house looks like everyone else's, not only do we get a sense of, I do belong here, but also other people are reminding us that their perception is that we belong here as well. And that we're significant. You want to test that theory? Go buy a ring. Go buy a crosser ring and put it in your driveway and watch how people look at your house when they drive by. Like their conformity is a real thing. It's a real thing. And in the verbs, listen, having the perception of significance is as good as actually being significant. Case in point, you may not think that you're that significant of a person, but no one else better tell you that you're not significant. I heard this story one time that a pastor told of this single mother who was having a really hard time trying to get everything together, and just life was just throwing her lots of curveballs. So she goes to this church and asks for help. And the leaders say, of course, we want to help you out. So they go to her house and they look, and they notice that she was not lying. Like, it's a beautiful suburban home, but just like no food, hardly any toys for the kids. They noticed that the car probably hadn't been moved in a long time, and the gas tank was empty. So on the spot, they write this dear woman a check to say, hey, we want to help you get some food for your kids. One of the leaders lived close by to the woman, and the next week decided to stop in and just check on her. And so he drives by, and he notices that all of her children have brand new bikes. So his first thought, which would be my thought, maybe it would be your thought too, is, did she use that money that we gave her for food to buy her kids new bikes? Surely that can't be the case. So he watched for a little bit, and sure enough, the kids brought their bikes back into the garage and put them up. So he goes back to the church and tells all of the leaders what what occurred. And so they decided to talk to her and confront her. And they're really frustrated, which, can we blame them? They gave money that people had given them for reasons such as providing food for people, and this woman had gone out and bought bikes for her kids. So the leaders go to the house. And as they go to the house, they notice that the mom is sitting on the porch watching the kids play. And as they're getting out of the car, 4 more kids fly by them on the same bike. They take mental note and shut the door. And immediately the woman comes over to the leaders and she says, look, I know that money was for food. I know what I did was probably wrong, but like my kids have wanted those bikes for so long and I haven't been able to get them. And then she says this, I don't want to be the only mom on the block that can't get the bikes that my kids really want for them. Now we can hear that story and we can say different, we can land in different positions and we can think different things. We can think, yeah, but mom, that money was for food. That money was for food, and that's not wrong. And we could say that, and we would be right. But there's also something else being revealed here that's deeply embedded inside of our suburban minds and hearts that we don't really think about that often. And that's this: that oftentimes the greatest pursuit of treasure that we're on is simply the validation of our significance from other people. At the end of the day, the thought of people looking at this woman like she was less than or not a significant mom drove her to use money for food to buy the bikes. And I don't know if you and I would behave really that much differently. Because perception of significance is as important and maybe even more important in some situations than actually having significance. We care very, very dearly what people think about us. And because of that, every human being at every point in time, in every culture, like we're all on this treasure hunt together. Like we're longing for outside validation. We're longing for someone to say that we're significant. And that in itself, my friend, that's not a bad thing. The fact that you and I need to be validated and told that we're significant is not a bad thing. In fact, we could argue that God has wired us like that. Now, what the author does in a really unique way is he's really showcasing us 2 different examples of people pursuing outside validation. Haman is looking for all the people in his life and saying, tell me how great I am. And for anyone not willing to do that, he's willing to kill me. But Esther goes to a different place. Esther goes to a God who has made her, who sustains her, and says, I need you to validate me, because no one else is going to do it the way in which you can. So Esther goes to God for her validation. A God who loves Esther. A God who delights in Esther. A God who rejoices in her life. A God who calls her by name. A God who promised never to leave her or forsake her. A God who has planned greatness for her. A God who cherishes her. A God who's proud of what she's becoming. A God who will never change his mind about her. A God who will protect her. A God who will avenge the injustices that she has faced. A God who will never let her go. A God that says, you are valuable to me. Not for anything that you've done, but for who you are. And this perception of God on Esther is so powerful and personal that Esther is able to live freely and boldly, knowing that that her significance is not tied to the perceptions of other people, but to a God for all eternity, past, present, and future, perceives her as significant and valuable already. The contrast is that with Haman is so finicky with who he is and how he's going to operate, because all of his significance is bound on what other people are saying about him. And all people can say is what they can say in a limited, simple way. But he's a slave to that. And now he's going to kill Mordecai for it. I think if we're honest with ourselves and with one another, or maybe I'll just say for me, when I look at the character of Haman that's developed in Esther chapter 5, if I'm honest, I think the only real difference between Haman and me is opportunity. I said, I don't know what goes on inside your head when someone is not externally validating you the way that you feel like you need to be. That go dark. I got into ministry because I loved playing Xbox, and I just thought ministry was going to be only playing Xbox all the time. True, that's a true story. Second reason I got into ministry is because I thought, man, this is an area in which people would feed me good things. Like this is an area, this is a career where I'm going to be surrounded with people that love me and want the best for me, and they're going to tell me how great I am. And I really thought that. But what I've learned is this, that taking the route of Haman and depending your significance on what people can, or how people can validate you is utterly brutal. It is utterly chaotic. So while I thought coming into ministry would be this perpetual, you're so awesome, you're so great, what I'm learning is coming into ministry, I'm having to learn how to not care what people think about me. Ministry is the crucible by which God is crucifying my need to be perceived well by people and to fully rest and trust in God's perception of me alone. Now, I haven't arrived. I still struggle with it. But as I read Haman, I wonder how much of Haman identifies with who we are too. I wonder if really the only difference in Haman's heart and my heart is opportunity. But here's the truth. Here's where I want to end. There is no one that perceives your significance like the God of the Bible. Jesus reminds us in Matthew 13, which is a phenomenal chapter, talking about the kingdom of heaven. He reminds us that we are treasure hunters, and we're searching for this treasure that can only be found experiencing the rule and reign of God himself. He says in verse 44, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. And then his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Like Jesus shows us that our need for outside approval from others that we're looking for is there because God made it to be there, but it will only be satisfied if we're getting the approval from the one in whom we've been created to find approval, God himself. It's under his rule and under his reign we experience joy upon joy, not diminishing return after diminishing return. To such an extent that experiencing and placing our hope in what God and the way God's validating us only leaves joy and perpetual sense of purpose and significance. And why is that so great? What's the verse that follows up in Matthew 13 that's just so overwhelmingly surprising? Because Jesus takes it from another angle. You see, we spend our entire existence trying to get noticed as significance by other people. Or maybe you don't, but I have. All the while, there's a God who has been and will continue to spend his entire existence seeking to show us how significant we already are. He says in verse 45, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. And oftentimes I think we think of that verse as the way in which we ought to treasure Jesus, that we need to cling to him and forsake everything else, be willing to get rid of everything for the sake of being in his presence. But what we don't realize is when Jesus tells this parable, when he's telling us this verse, we're not the object of the verse. The king and his kingdom are the object and subject of the verse. What Jesus is saying is that we have been made for this perceived, to find this external validation. Like God's created us with dignity and honor and significance. He's crafted us with beauty and value greater than the rarest of rare pearls. And he longs to remind us of this. And his voice is the one that we're longing to hear. We long to hear him say, I'm not embarrassed of you. I'm not disgusted with you. I do not regret your existence. And the most miraculous thing is that in Jesus Christ, God's voice takes on flesh. Why? To demonstrate how significant you are. To put it all out there. He leaves his throne of riches to search for the one treasure that he didn't have. More than a priceless pearl, more than the most rarest of jewels. you and I are of so much value to Jesus that there's nothing he's not willing to fully expend to showcase your significance, including his own life. Jesus offers his life in exchange for ours. And in doing so, he purchases our forgiveness from sins and keeps us from it. And he restores us to a right standing with God, where we have access to his presence now and more fully in the future. Where his presence is reminding us, externally validating over us, I see you, I'm with you, proud of you. But this is the treasure that our heart is looking for. This is the external validation we've been made for. Let's not settle looking from peer to peer, trying to find it that way, when there's an infinite, glorious, holy, righteous, loving God who's willing to share with you exactly how valuable you are. I think as we process living in culture, our culture needs to hear this. We need to celebrate what we can celebrate with our culture, pointing them to a story which is so true, where there's a God who loves them to the point in which he gave his own life, that he might demonstrate in the greatest act of all time how significant you and I are. Amen. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us a different story to apply, a greater story than anything we could construe on our own. Father, these things, love and forgiveness and outward validation, these are things that are incredibly important to us. And you offer all of them perfectly, holy, righteously. Father, would we turn to you? Would we trust you? Would your opinion of us matter more than anyone else's opinion, past, present, or future? Lord, would you undo our bonds of slavery to think that other people have to perceive us in a certain way? And can we just freely, lovingly trust that your voice, that your validation is enough? Lord, teach us to celebrate your truth wherever it may be. We love you, we trust you. In Jesus' name.